Wow, excellent. Okay, so housekeeping rules I just told, but also I am recording this session, and I will hopefully, next week or sometime. I could not upload the first webinar with Patricia. She was on the other side of the argument against natural wines, and now you're the side. I will do the same way. Basically, we transfer. I will share this video with you guys, unless somebody can help me with how to shrink that video, large videos, and to upload an email. Okay, so that's a long time with as a purchaser, as also in the sales team. So you can give us from both sides of the argument. That would be great. So I am going to just put the questions on my screen and then go. But first thing, before I start the questions, I want to ask you: do you remember first time you have tasted natural wine, and do you remember your how you felt about this wine?
Very clearly, because I think everyone has their little epiphany in life, their moment of astonishment when something happens and it rearranges I think almost the molecules of your palate. For me, the wine was a wine from Olivier Cousin, who's a grower in Anjou, and certainly godfather of biodynamics around there. One of the godfathers of biodynamics, behaves a bit like the godfather as well, and I hadn't heard of him. I didn't really know anything. We were in a small Parisian natural wine bar, but I didn't know anything about natural wine. I haven't even heard of it at that stage. So it was the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And the owner, who's a woman called Danny, said she had like a list of 400 wines, and I didn't know half the producers, most of the producers. She just poured a wine into the glass and said, what do you think? And I tried it, and I was shocked because the color was it was pretty cloudy. It was sort of almost like amber, but not from skin contact, but through oxidative winemaking and aging. And it had this almost raw elemental, power in the mouth. The acidity was sort of ricocheted from side to side. So my brain sort of scrambled, then unscrambled. And my first impression was, I'm not sure if I actually like this, but it's pretty amazing. And then we finished the bottle really quickly, which is always a good sign with the wine. And then we had something else, a Macon Clusier Organite from Julien Guillot, Clos de Vigne Domaine. And it was the same sort of thing, the same sort of style of the wine. But the wine was very different, one being Southern Burgundy, one being Anjou, different terroir, etc. And I thought, but I haven't tasted or drunk these styles of wines before. They're sort of almost like, they're so vivid, they're so animal, not in a feral sense, but in a wild sense, and amazingly pure. And I think almost like a switch was flicked, and I thought, oh, I want to try more of those. I want to expose my palate. And I think I went in from the slightly locked state of mind that a lot of people have when they're drinking wines that they feel comfortable with, into go on, throw anything you've got at me, and the crazier the better, because I've got to push the envelope as far as my personal taste goes.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that experience with us, Douglas. What I did is, as I shared the questions with you earlier, I grouped them into style, the market, the past, the present, and the future, that type of thing, or the style as well. So I will start with the style questions, if that's okay with you. So the first thing is, how do you define natural wines?
How do I define them? I think it would be better. Yes, because that's the emphasis. Because what I say now is something that's like a very broad-based technical definition, and not what I would do, which would be a much more emotional definition. So for me, natural wines is like, if you miss the emotion, inherent in the term, then you miss what it's about. But broadly speaking, and as a beginner's thing, it's wines made with grapes, which are farmed sustainably, organically, and possibly biodynamically, harvested by hand, so selected, low yields, fermented with their own yeast, must be with their own yeast, and the subsequent transformation process into wine done without anything added other than a minimal amount of sulfur, and possibly no sulfur whatsoever. I don't think it addresses the spirit of the wine, but it sort of it ticks the broad boxes. Now, a lot of people who define natural wines, particularly wine fairs, have a manifesto of like boxes that you need to tick. Thou shalt not have new oak in a natural wine. I think that's useful, particularly to sort of worry about the minutiae, and actually to put numbers on the sulfur levels or do anything like that. You sort of like, it's in an emotional sense, natural when you taste it. A wine which is unforced and pure and harmonious. But those are the minimum requirements. The farming is the main thing. You can't make a natural wine without sort of sustainably organically farmed grapes and native yeast ferments, and everything else is to a level, and nothing should be added, no acid, no enzymes. But we don't need to give a list of additions, because you could add 50, 60, 70 chemical substances and compounds to wines, but we don't need to we say nothing added other than sulfur, and then it's fairly clear. As to filtration and fining, which we might come on to later,
Yeah.
it's a minimal amount or nothing, so it's not denaturing the wine. For me, natural wines are the least denatured by process, but we understand there is a process of transformation, and no one who ever talks about natural wines ever thought they just dropped off of a vineyard in the wild and just fell straight into a bottle.
Yeah. Also, I mean, that was a very interesting, thorough explanation or definition of the natural wines. SO2, we will talk about that, later on. Mm-hmm. But, I just wanted to ask you now about that, the limit. What do you think is the maximum, or what is, how do you define that SO2 should be, or top? Is there a threshold for you there?
Yeah, this is like a theological discussion, like, the Roman Catholic Church versus the Protestants, and you have huge schisms on like 1 milligram of sulfur, which is neither here nor there. Technically, you have to put, sulfites on the bottle if it's above 10. Okay. But you can have above 10 anyway, naturally occurring sulfites. Sulfites automatically are part of winemaking. Freakishly, we have 1 or 2 wines in our portfolio that have 0.01% of sulfur. I don't understand that's possible, but that's what the lab readout said. Equally, we had another grower who added no sulfur and ended up with 90 total, which is like, again, like, what's going on there? But so is it the fact you don't add sulfur that makes it natural? For me, like adding, like, most natural producers add, let's say 20, 25, 30 max, and we'll get a total of around 35 to 40. You obviously need less on red wine. So there are sort of regulations already in place which say, the total sulfites allowed on red wines would be, let's say, a maximum of, let's say, 20. Whereas white wines, which are not protected, don't have the antioxidants or the phenolics, you allow for a higher amount. But that's ridiculous as well, because skin contact wines would fall into red wines, not into white wines. So it's a bit arbitrary. For me, personally speaking, I feel comfortable with wines below 50 milligrams for white, and below 30, 20 maybe for red. But I'm very sensitive to sulfur, so I notice it in tiny quantities, and I notice it when it's not part of the wine, as it were, so it feels like free in the wine, and therefore, to me, it's an unnatural taste. I don't want it there any more than I want 100% new oak to be there. So I regard it as not a fault, but as something which is not really, integral to the wine itself and should not be there.
Okay.
But it's there to protect. It's there for a purpose, to protect the wine.
Okay, great, thank you. So I will go back to the term natural wine. So do you think this is this is more of conviction in the production of the wine as a way of production? Is it the conviction or a statement? Some of the producers, they work naturally, sometimes follow organic or biodynamic methods, but they don't necessarily always use a natural wine. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I understand it for a variety of reasons. So vin nature is sometimes used by producers in France. Vini Veri, real wine in Italy. But I mean, I don't know. I think the word itself is problematic because people have a problem with it, not because there's anything wrong with it. For me, I can talk about natural wines and I feel very comfortable because I know what I'm talking about, and I know when I taste one that that's a natural wine. But it's a word that has been appropriated and colonized by different groups. On the one side, bureaucracy. You're not allowed, for example, to have the word like even organic on a label. This is an organic wine because it's the property of the Soil Association. Natural also disenchants people who feel that it's somehow some people saying taking the moral high ground. If I say that I make natural wine, that means you make unnatural wine.
Yes.
That's completely ridiculous. It's a straw man argument. The opposite of natural is wine which is conventional, which is made with chemicals and additives for a purpose. That purpose is perfectly legitimate, but it's denatured to make the wine a product. A natural wine is a wine which is not specifically made for an audience or a product placement. Therefore, it is made with a minimum of additives and more of an accompaniment of the process rather than the process at all. And that, I think, is the big difference. And I think we're allowed to call it natural as a result. But if you don't want to call it that, you want to call it naked or raw or real or whatever, no one's going to argue with you. But I think those terms are even more vague, at least because we've been talking about natural wines now for a good 15, 20 years, then people are on the same page. You're either for it or against it or somewhere in the middle. But we've established terms of reference, and the definition I gave you at the beginning is pretty well agreed upon, whether you like it or not, But I know a lot of critics of natural wines would say it's wines with Brett and this and that, and I think that's not a definition of natural wines. It's your fantasy definition of what you dislike about them.
Yeah, we'll come to those in a minute, but I think I understand that reaction very well. When I first heard natural wine, my reaction was, what about the other wines? Are they not natural? That was my first reaction. But I was like so curious, what are they? I haven't never tasted natural wines. But anyway, that was.
Well, one of my favorite books of criticism at university, I studied English, was called 7 Types of Ambiguity. And basically, I created an artificial exercise in which I did 7 types of natural wine because it's a spectrum. Like wine is a spectrum. So, there are out and out chemical, industrial wines, and there's like conventional wines, and then there's wines which are, like organic wines or partly natural, then, straight natural, and slightly offbeat natural, then full on funky way out on the fringes of, nature natural. Well, I think we can accommodate. We can say it's quite a natural wine. We can qualify things, but to say put something in a compartment, then I think that creates the antagonism. Because for one person, natural means wrong because you cannot make wine without additives. For another person, natural is a good thing because it's a statement of being able to make wine without additives. So it's but we know the result is always different. And actually, I mean, we maybe come on to this later. Winemakers, they're empiricists. They don't like just blindly go in and just say, let nature take its course. I'm not going to do anything. No one wants to sell vinegar. And believe me, as trendy as it might be in some places, no one wants to drink vinegar.
That's right. Okay, I'm going to go to the SO2. Do you believe this is hardcore dogmatic natural winemakers who believe a wine isn't natural unless it's made without SO2 are hurting the category, or pushing out winemakers who follow all natural wine standards except the use of a small amount of SO2 at bottling? So back to the SO2, please.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't know anyone. I know a lot of natural wine producers, but very few are dogmatic about this. There's no what I call out and out zero SO2 people. I mean, one of the most famous producers, of course, Emmanuel Houillon, when he became sort of like world famous, and people would pilgrimage to Pupien in the Arbois to sort of meet him and taste his wine and say, I want to make this wine. He said, like, yeah, but you can't, because the only way I can make this wine is because I farm in a particular way, and there's no shortcuts to making it. There's no shortcuts to making natural wine. So you have to taste, you have to be vigilant, you have to understand, you have to be self-critical. And if things are going wrong, you need to decide whether to give it the medicine being sulfur. If it's healthy, if the ferment's going well and everything's in its place, then why would you add anything? Even as an insurance, why would you add it? So you have to take a practical view of what is going on. I don't believe people put there are some growers who have done this, but they weren't growers. They were people saying, I want to make natural wine. They weren't farming their own vineyards. So for starters, you're already dealing with an unknown variable. If they're not your own grapes, then you haven't got the quality to start with. As soon as you start becoming a natural vigneron, in other words, working in the vineyard, organically, low yield, selecting the fruit, then you're halfway there to making natural wines without sulfur, because you know what you've got. As soon as you know what you've got, then you make your decision. This is probably going to be, made without sulfur, unless something goes wrong, like the VA is too high or something, or, you start tasting mousiness in the barrel, then you hit it with a little bit of sulfur. Some people always put, like 10 milligrams or a microscopic amount just before bottling. I'm not sure that's necessary, because if you taste the same wine made with and without sulfur, and there are some producers like Pierre Frick who do this, they're like chalk and cheese. And in my humble opinion, the wines made without sulfur are way better than the wines made with even a fraction of sulfur, which actually happens to disturb the wine. So, but that's a subjective thing anyway. Someone else might think the opposite. But yeah, so my view on sulfur is that it's not what natural wine is all about. It's a relative thing. The vast majority use some sulfur, a tiny little bit. Some, if they feel they can do it, will work without sulfur, but not in every vintage. Definitely not in every vintage. Take a vintage like I can't remember, 14. Yeah, it's too wet.
Yeah. Okay, Douglas, that's great. So I just want to move on from that to link that to the faults. How often have you found faults in natural wines? And what do you think about in the sales environment? If a consumer finds a natural wine faulty, because of VA or Brett or mousiness, do you think they should be refunded?
Okay, so yes, there's two questions about here. What the faults? Then you have to look at the nature of the faults. So I know somewhere in the questions it was like Brett, VA, mousiness. So Brett, like, I don't find this a problem on natural wines. I've tasted more. I've been drinking wine since the 70s, believe it or not. I tasted more Brett on clarets from the early 80s than I ever tasted on any natural wines. But I think also I taste less Brett now anyway, because it's not a big problem. Most people have cleaned up their wineries and work in a very hygienic way. The most hygienic wineries I've ever been on are natural wineries, because they know there's no room for error. You lose it all, basically. So you drop a grape, that's it. Something can happen. So Brett, I don't find a problem. I have more Brett on conventional wines than natural wines. But interestingly, I'm not averse to Brett in wines, in moderation. In fact, it makes some wines for me. And another thing is, people misunderstand what Brett is. They think it's something that's in the winery. It's in the vineyard as well. So basically, a terroir wine, we work with a winery in which there are 3 vineyards they use, and one vineyard always gives Brett. That wine always has Brett. The other 2 wines are not like that at all. So celebrate what you've got. It's going to be the way. You can't clean that out of the vineyard. Well, you could, but you'd have to replant it. So VA is another thing. It's incredibly controversial, and I probably have an unfashionable view, is that if it works, if it's okay and elevates the wine, then I think it's fine. I think most people would say that's a reasonable thing. Some of the greatest wines ever made had rockingly high amounts of VA. Bordeaux from the 40s, Musar, Reyes. It's a who's who, Priorat from the 70s, 80s, who's who of great wines. VA is a part of the wine and enables to age like incredibly well. But if you don't like the character within the wine, you're fair enough, don't drink it. Mousiness is something that's really recent. I think in the last 5 years I've noticed it becoming a problem. What do we do with all these things? Well, Brett is like, it's a matter of taste, and VA is a matter of taste. Unless it's really bad, then we hold it back. Then we taste the wines and say, VA is really high. We're gonna keep it for like 2 years or 3 years. We tell the grower as well, and they taste it and they agree with us, or they say they like VA or whatever. Mousiness is difficult because not enough is known about it. So what we do is we take the wine back and just keep it. until the point when the mousiness dissipates. But no one knows when that's going to be because no one really understands what's going on. But we've had wines which have been mousy, kept them for 6 months, a year, and the mousiness pretty well disappeared. But I don't like it as a flavor in the wine or an aroma. But do we compensate people? Well, we'll take the wine back. I mean, but I don't think it's a problem. I mean, like TCA is still more of a problem than these things. We're making an active buyer's decision to. We taste the grower, we taste from the barrel, we taste the wine when it comes here. We make that assessment. If the wine isn't marketable, we won't sell it.
Yeah.
And we will communicate that to the grower, and we will work something out. So I don't believe in tasting panels. I believe the quality control comes from the most important people in this case, the grower and the importer.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not. It's not like we've got like thousands of cases which we're suddenly flooding the market with and poisoning people. We're talking about a few bottles. We get, if something slips through, we get a complaint, we respond to it, and I think that's the best thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I have another interesting question. You visit a lot of wineries, natural winemaker producers, and by dynamically produced oak barrels, do you think this is popular amongst the natural wine producers? What do you think?
Yeah, it's something I know nothing about. I mean, there's a French, sort of oak barrel producer who produces some biodynamically farmed oak barrels for a winery in Australia. But I've not heard of that. I mean, I've not heard of it outside of that. I mean, there may be other people, but it's like that means like basically, basically growing trees according to the biodynamic calendar. I mean, it's a tiny thing.
Yeah.
Most people, of course, like if you go to Austria, for example, they always love to use local wood, or Hungary, they want to use local wood, or States as well sometimes, or specific barrel producers. And what you do is you build up a relationship with your cooper,
mm-hmm.
Who knows your wines. So I guess if more people were doing the biodynamic production, then the people who are really fanatical about biodynamic winemaking and farming and etc. would say this coheres with our philosophy, because we believe biodynamics is a unifying, holistic philosophy, and the barrels are part of the wine, which is true. They do become part of the wine, but it's at the moment it's not a big thing.
Okay, great. Now, the next question is about the typicity of the grapes. When it comes to natural wines, do you think, in a blind tasting environment, do you think that, you can't, the natural wines, they redefine, refine, reinforce, or, the typicity in a blind tasting environment?
This is my favorite thing to talk about, like typicity and terroir. I mean,
Yeah.
terroir, of course, is a mystical thing anyway. How do you know it? You just know it. You feel it. You sense it. Typicity is the same thing. We don't know what's typical. The one thing I would say is that let's take grape variety out of it, because grape variety is only sort of interpreting something. If you look at Sauvignon, people would say, what is the typicity of Sauvignon? And then they think about like a Sauvignon de Touraine or a Sancerre or a Marlborough Sauvignon. And they say, well, it's herbaceous, it's gooseberries, it's currants. Well, yes, it's the typicity of the cultured yeast you're using, the typicity of machine harvesting, the typicity of stainless steel ferments and cold fermentation aromas. That's not what the grape variety is about. Take another producer, let's say one in Styria, who harvests 3 weeks after they would do, let's say, in Sancerre. The grapes then are almost purple in color. They do slow press in a barrel, oxidative, lots of, the juice goes oxidative, then settles. They age oxidatively. They do wild ferments. The wine is the opposite, but which is the true representation of Sauvignon. The conventional view of Sauvignon, which is really only 30, 40 years old, that Sauvignon has been made with all this technical, marvels, like, pneumatic presses and temperature control and all that thing, or something which is 80 or 90 years ago, which was more approximating to what natural wines are now, sort of, because that's the thing, is like what we think of wine is a snapshot, a very short snapshot in 8,000 years of winemaking. And what we have now is a cleaned up product, which is really bears no relation to what people's grandfathers and great grandfathers were drinking in certain regions, where wine was more was just treated differently. It was just treated as something else that you made. You made wine for the table, or beer, or your own cider, or or you had a sort of like polycultural existence. What you didn't do is create this create a monoculture to create a product for a supermarket or for a critic. So it's a very different thing. So what is typicity? Going back to that, for me, typicity is is an aspect of terroir, really.
Yes.
So and of course, what is terroir? But it's the aggregate of so many different things. Mesoclimate, microclimate, rocks, but also unquantifiable things, as well as geology and geography. It's also culture, gastronomy, and of course, most important of all, the personality of the vigneron. And they make 1,000 decisions in the vineyard, in the winery, and terroir is the result. That sense of that place in that year and that person all combined. That is terroir and typicity, because two individuals will make two entirely different wines from the same grapes, from the same soil. So even one individual can make two entirely different wines because their choices are different. That's the really fascinating thing. So there is typicity, but there also isn't.
Okay. I have to just tell you that I have, I think, 5 sections. This, I don't know your timing, but I'm happy to continue more than an hour, because I think we just took 5 questions. Even despite I think I did 7 from that lot of 10 or 15. So the last question about the stylus, which I like this question a lot, is the cloudy. Why natural wines remain cloudy? Is there a as opposed to conventional wines, if there's a sedimentation at the bottom of it, but the natural wines, remain cloudy. Is there a scientific explanation that the winemakers do there? That's why is that the heterogeneous?
I think you have to look at what every winemaker does is different. So some natural winemakers rack a lot, so the wines aren't cloudy. I mean, they're not like what I call. If you look at something, a wine, it will look, according to how much you filter it, it will change color.
Yeah.
I was at the London Wine Fair 2 years ago, and there was a bottle of Pinot Grigio in a clear bottle, and I took a picture of it, and the guy said, "Do you want to try it?" I said, "No, it's horrific. This wine actually is blue. Like, it looks like it has blue glints." Because I'm sure it'd been like strip filtered like 4 times, and that is such an unnatural color. Whereas, like, a cloudy wine, well, stuff is cloudy, like beer, real ale is cloudy, and cider can certainly cloudy, unfiltered wines, leaving the wines obviously in contact with bits of grape skin or the lees or whatever. I mean, that's what nourishes the wine. It gives it its life, its energy. And now, when I did the WSET course, it said, like, a sign of a good wine is you hold it up to the light, and it should be clear. And now I think of a clear wine as being, well, that's really denatured or over filtered. I think now, if I see something which is slightly turbid, I think there's some substance in there. There's something to get your teeth into. It's real in a way. Well, we'll smell it and taste it and see whether it lives up to that. But I find wines which are, I mean, particularly amber wines or orange wines, I find them incredibly wonderful and appealing and appetizing to look at, in the way that I don't think something which looks like a glass of water is very appetizing unless you're into water.
Okay, great. Now, so those questions were hopefully helping you guys, the students there, taking notes. I see them for the first part of your assignment. Now we're going to move on to market business questions. As an importer of wine, have you experienced a consumer demand for more natural wines? I mean, you've been there for now 25 years, for one of the biggest or most important, perhaps, arguably, I don't know, in the UK. So what's your thoughts about that? Is there a huge demand now for natural wine? What's the market overview, please?
Are you talking about the UK or all over the world? I mean, I can sort of answer it both.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it will be very interesting because we have students from all over the world. But first, in the UK point of view, please.
From the UK point of view, okay. So when we first started shipping natural wines, probably the first importer to ship them in any reasonable quantity, there wasn't a lot to choose from. There weren't that many growers working in that avowed way. That was 2005, 2006. But the real turning point for us is when we opened a natural wine bar called Terroir in London. And then, in a way, we had to populate the list with a few more examples. So we started shipping a lot more. Terroir was like, well, it could be a massive failure. Like, there wasn't there wasn't a wine bar culture in London at that point, let alone there were no natural wine bars. So what reference was there? Well, almost from day one, the place was like, packed, and and within for 3 years, we were like the hottest ticket in town. I mean, not because we're doing anything amazing. The food was good, service was okay,
Mhm.
and people were drinking these wines critically or uncritically. They were just fascinated. Now, fast forward to 2020, there are probably 30 or 40 natural wine bars. There are so many retailers, both bricks and mortar ones and online retailers specializing purely in natural wines. There are 30 odd plus importers in the UK, all in London virtually, and some tiny specialists, just specializing in one country or one region, and some like us, across the world. We obviously have, two major fairs, Real Wine and Raw, which are two of the most, I mean, you get 180 growers visiting from around the world to each fair, and thousands of visitors and press. So, it's on the map. I mean, in a way, people don't really talk about anything else because, wine is a boring subject. And this sort of revolution, it was exciting when it started because there was so much opposition to it, and now I'm almost like weirdly disappointed because there isn't like no one's got an opinion, a hostile opinion to sort of get a hold of and like throw back a bit, but it just insinuated itself into wine culture. So one thinks of wine culture, one thinks of natural wines as not a thing apart necessarily, but integrated into UK wine culture in a really healthy way, and it's also, again, we'll probably have a question about this later, but it's what this latest generation of drinkers have grown up with knowing. So I'm from another generation, grew up with Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone in California, and Super Tuscans, but these guys, they weren't like taught in the same way that like Bordeaux equals good, Parker equals this, like points mean prizes. They're actually drinking for the sake of pleasure, and they're interested in wines with a story, and what their friends are drinking, and following each other on Instagram and posting their experiences. It's a viral thing. I don't like to use that word in these times, but that's how natural wine has spread and will continue to spread. Not necessarily as natural wine, inverted commas, like a separate thing, but as the wines themselves and the growers who make those wines.
Okay, so that's the UK. I've been to Terroir. Before we, I would like to ask you about the world, what's going on around the world, Japan and New York, for example. But I've been to Terroir. What is your second favorite, or the one that you don't, except Terroir? Where do you go in London?
Brawn, but that was our restaurant before we sold it. So I go to Brawn because of the feel of the place. So Brawn is in Hackney. Hello.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we opened Terroir in 2008. We opened Brawn in, I think, 2010, and then 3 other restaurants after that. Brawn we sold a few years ago to the chef who was the original chef at Terroir, and for me, it's gone from strength to strength. I love it. I think the food's great, and the wine is great, and I love I just love eating and drinking in an atmosphere like that. It's very sort of like, it's not pretentious, it's not hipster, it's just like appreciative. And people, seeing every table filled with a bottle of amazing loveliness is very gratifying. I don't take credit for that. I just like seeing that. And of course Terroir was like that. It started with zero knowledge, effectively. Nobody knew what these wines were, and just to see someone ordering a bottle of Sancerre that was like stinky with aldehyde and cloudy and crazy and whatever, and in a carafe at room temperature, and then accepting it, like, wow. And wearing a pinstripe suit as well. There were so many like anomalies that it just made me think that in a way the barriers around wine are exploding. There's nothing to, you feel closer to the wine. There's no pretension, no sort of like no one being snobby about it. I'm sure there are places where that, there is a sense of like, hipsterism, or I know better than you, or just you need to be seen to be drinking things, but not in my experience. I mean, people tend to sort of like, they would fall out of love with it after a while. But I think there are some pretty dedicated drinkers, and a lot of them.
So I just want to know shortly or quickly with that, where is it? Where else is it? Paris, New York, Tokyo? Where is the what's going on?
Well, Paris is of course the home and the origin. Then Tokyo next, probably. Melbourne, Sydney, New York,
So it's
and then recently Berlin, Vienna, Rome, of course, and even Tbilisi. I mean, like, you're finding like outposts. So yes, of course, it starts in the cities. It starts with the younger generation, the people who travel, and then it spreads, slowly into other places. But it's also a sign that people travel. I mean, like sommeliers in London, for example, they're not classic old French sommeliers anymore. They're from all over the world. They come, they do a stage in a wine bar, and they've been these are the wines they want to drink. And when they're serving them to customers, they don't want to sell a classic bottle of Bordeaux. They want to sell something that they have an emotional investment in, that they put on the wine list for a reason. So we're seeing the wines in Michelin 3-star restaurants, and we're sitting in my local pub. So it's like, that's democracy in action, if you like, wine democracy.
Okay, now I'm going to move to the next question. What is the criticism coming from in natural wines? Is it in the industry? Where does it stem from? Is it, I just want to add on to that question, is it because they don't understand, or is it they understand that they don't like something? What is it coming from? Do you know the criticism?
Well, from a variety of sources. I think enologists, winemakers, because if you say, like, this wine is great and it was made without like temperature control, or a technical winemaker who went to wine college and brought back, and understands process and chemistry and microbiology. It's made by some peasant farmer who's just always been making, basically is a farmer who makes wines. Then it demystifies their job, a lot. So the enologist then becomes the creator of product, of a soulless product. So I think there's a sort of a sense of jealousy there, and a lot of criticism comes from enologists who say that technically you cannot make wines naturally, without sulfur, which is rubbish. I mean, so that's an unscientific observation. It comes from wine critics, of course, people like Parker, as well as, but other wine critics, because they felt passed by. It wasn't the wines they appreciated anyway, because for them, wine is a pyramid or a hierarchy. There are the great wines. It's like great literature. D.H. Lawrence or Joyce or Virginia Woolf, and everyone else is below them. For them, there are the great wines, and then there are these wines which you could never measure because they are by definition mutable and inconsistent. And for us, that's the beauty of the wine, is that it changes not only from year to year, but month to month and day to day and moment to moment. How do you mark a wine which is so living that it has no structure that you can put around it? So they don't like that. Then there are people who they go into bandwagons, and this bandwagon rolled right over them and they missed it. And so they have to be contrarian. And I know a lot of people like that. And they basically, you see them on Facebook or in their blogs, and they take a straw man position. They say, oh, natural wines taste like this or that. And then you ask them, what natural wines have you tasted? And they can't give you an answer. A bit like a sort of advisor to a prime minister. They don't answer the question, which is like, what have you tried? And why, as someone who purports to be scientific and open-minded, are you so close to the idea of tasting and judging things on their merits? The best you could say, or the worst you could say, is that I don't like that wine. Not that all wines are faulty, because I've heard that some of the wines are faulty. It's just the most ridiculous thing. So, yeah, I was quite like outspoken early on, because there's nothing I dislike more than lazy argument. And so it wasn't their taste that I was having a problem with. It was the way they were expressing it, and the sort of grotesque generalizations that were being bandied forth. Also, you have to remember that there are a lot of really wonderful winemakers. It's their living. And when people are effectively bad-mouthing what they're doing, that's not healthy. But the most insulting thing is that, I don't know, probably around the world, every day, several million people are drinking what we call natural wines. to say this is to say that several million people are being hoodwinked in every glass of wine that they try, and that is complete rubbish. Just the worst and most patronizing argument. So I don't have time for that. But conversely, I will say that it's helped natural wine a great deal. The critics have fanned the flames. If you ever thought things were sort of going out of fashion or needed a bit of a, like a boost, then somebody like saying at the beginning of the year, that's the last we'll hear about natural wine, thank God. And then of course they just start the argument going, and people become curious and want to try the wines.
Okay, now the next one is about the distance and the transportation as an importer. I know you look after USA, which is long distance. The question is about Australia, but I will just tweak that to USA. As for, and when you compare that to those from Europe, from Croatia, Slovenia, and Austria, what is that? Is there a risk in that? Because of the distance, temperature control, and the storage facilities. If you take those into consideration, what is your opinion about that as an importer?
Well, we were actually first people to import natural wines from Australia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have a lot of claims to fame, but that is one of them. So we recognize this sort of movement of young Turks type, who are doing things and making wines without salt. And yeah, and of course, like, how problematic is it to ship wines from Australia and New Zealand and the States, of course, because it doesn't go over land, it goes through the Panama Canal, and it stops in every port and bush in California, But for me, wine is wine. Yes, the fact if it's natural wine, you think it's more fragile, but no, actually, the wine itself, there's more material in the wine. It's not no more fragile than anything. But I wouldn't expose any wine to intense heat or whatever. So yes, we always do use refrigeration or ensure that shipments are refrigerated. And we've never had any out of condition wine. I think overland is a bit more problematic because you're taking, you can get a burst of weather. Like normally we would never ship in August. Then it's not July and August. Now we're getting heat waves in April, May.
Yeah.
If it's like 6 months of the year, we can't ship. It's just, and you can't ship when it's too cold. Or I remember from the States, we'd never got a thing because there were storms in the Atlantic for 3 weeks. We need to wonder whether you're ever going to get wine from anywhere. But I think the thing is, be sensible, take precautions. Yeah, I mean, natural wine is fragile in one sense, in that it's still living, so I suppose like a inert Pinot Grigio, maybe there's nothing to kill off. You can shake it up and do whatever you like, as long as you don't open it, you're fine. Whereas a natural wine is like, there might be bacteria or something could re-ferment or whatever, but it happens rarely, I have to say, and we're sensible about it. And you can ship from all over the world. It's not a problem, but just take care that you don't do it in a massive heat wave, because it only needs one lorry to get stuck on the side of a road, and that's it.
Yeah, apply common sense. Okay, the next one is about the regions, wine regions. Is there, in your opinion, there is a certain area, wine region, that is easier to practice natural wine making, or to the other more challenging areas as opposed to other challenging areas? And I want to add to that from my own is, can you tell us, one region that is, wow, this is, they're producing amazing at the moment. Where is that in your opinion?
Okay, but the first thing is, can you make natural wine anywhere? You can make it anywhere. I mean, because if you're talking about the technical side, are there places which are better than others? It's a cultural thing, So, yeah, why is it the Loire, where with its climate, which is not conducive to biodynamic farming, is really the beating heart of biodynamics in France? And I think if you're going to go out on a limb, and say, right, I'm dedicating all my farming to biodynamics, and my wine it's easier to transition to natural wine, to making if you're farming biodynamically. So Loire, Jura, even more so, and Alsace, and then Roussillon. But curiously, where there's almost no really biodynamic organic culture, is Provence. It's easy to grow healthy grapes because you've got like Dr. Mistral and the perfect climate, but there's almost no natural winemaking as a result, because there's no need to do organic farming or biodynamics, because like so I think, then it becomes like more like, oh, we're making a product called a Provençal something or other, and we'll sell it. But in other regions, which are what like, also you have a lot of outsiders coming in, and people who recognize the amazing terroir in like places like the Roussillon, for example, old vines, great terroir, and a lot of outsiders. Then you get this community of producers who start working in a sort of collaborative way and exchanging information and equipment and so on and so forth. The Loire is like that intensely. In the Loire, they're united also by the hostility to the appellation authorities, the INO, which are, tend to be quite strict. And, Italy as well. There are parts of Italy where there's a really strong natural wine culture, like Piedmont, and Sicily. And then there are places like Campania where, for the size of the region it's not particularly, there's not many examples of organic and biodynamic farming there. So I think to cut to the question, organic and biodynamic farming, it being the prerequisite to places where you will find a natural wine culture, therefore more people practicing, so you get a critical mass. Oregon is another example where, organics is in the blood, biodynamics is the blood. That's where US Demeter, was formed in the 1920s, and ever since then. And also it's a communitarian place. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody is virtually everyone is supportive of everyone else's endeavors, big or small. Whereas California is much more disparate. Like, yes, there are pockets of interest, but there's no sense of a community, or very little sense of community as such. These are big generalizations, but it shows why it's places like, well, let's say our two countries that don't have a natural wine culture, Argentina and New Zealand.
Okay.
For very different reasons. So,
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's really great, Douglas. I wanted to ask you now, now move on to that next question there. But the biggest consumers, I mean, you just said, about the culture there, but now from the consumer point of view, how the most people discover the natural wines, and they're not, the person who asked this, they say things it's not available, but available out of the urban centers. So what is that, how do they meet natural wines people, the consumers?
Well, there's a wonderful thing called the internet, Google search. I mean, like, if someone lives in an Antarctic station and they want to buy a bottle of natural wine, they can email us and we'll send it around the world 10 times if they want. I mean, that's the beauty now, is the virtual world has brought availability of every wine.
No, maybe the question is more about, how do people meet, if they have...
how do people encounter it? Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to be like that.
Yes. Okay. How do people encounter it? Well, I guess in the on-trade, natural wine bars or restaurants. Well, obviously travel. Like, we should never forget that people go to places and taste wines, and those wines are recommended to them by a local sommelier, or they visit a winery, or they do some wine tourism and they come across the winery. I mean, in this country, I would say it's mostly in, let's say in wine bars and in retailers. But there are more people dedicated to these wines, to selling these wines now. It would have been difficult 10 years ago because there wasn't so much knowledge out there and not so much passion. But I think the people get into these artisanal wines, then they, it's so much easier to sell wine which has a story and a real person behind it and a sense of farming and a sense of place than it is to sell a product for just being the name on the bottle or the product. So I think it goes hand in hand with a much more intelligent and proactive cultural approach to wine selling and wine making and everything. So I think it's all bound as one. I think I'm trying to think of any other way that people might encounter it, but and of course, yes, living in the cities, you have a sort of a big advantage, but a lot of chefs have left London to open gastropubs and country house hotels, and they still want to take the wines with them effectively. Mm-hmm. What is worrying is that sometimes, and I worked in restaurants, so I understood this, a manager will say, or an owner will say, we must make sure we have a wine list that everybody understands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that what they do is they preach to a lower common denominator of drinker. That person doesn't exist. You basically communicate and say, try this wine. Tell me what you like to drink. And your Pascaline Lepeltier thing, I don't know where you're going to let you do that. There is an equivalent natural wine for
Mm.
that. Try
Yeah.
it, taste it. If you like it, or you don't like it, doesn't matter. You don't have to drink it. There's always something else.
Okay, no, that wasn't one of the questions that I asked, but you just answered. You agree. You agree with her. Great. Now I'm going to move on to the today and the future of the natural wines. So one of the questions um, we can link to the second one is about the labeling, definition. We discussed about that earlier. What do you think about the labeling standards of natural wines? Is there is there a need for that? Why or why not? And then we'll move on to the new French um, regulation in a minute. Okay.
Well, I mean, I always said there's no need for it because there's no agreement
Mm-hmm.
exactly to what natural wine is. So just because a few people come to their opinion of what it constitutes doesn't make that true. So I can live with uncertainty. I don't need to have labels, but I mean, I'm speaking personally. I don't think they're helpful, particularly to the consumer, because what does it mean? You read the label, but you don't know what's in the bottle still. For me, and also like these charters, there's nothing about quality in them either. It's like, so are you just examining on the numbers? Are you actually saying this wine is good enough? And I don't think it is about that. It's wanting to sort of create a club or something that can be controlled. So in the end, the only people who benefit are the bureaucrats because it's expensive to administer, so people have to be paid off. And wherever it's happened, and organic certification is like this as well, it's meaningless because it doesn't describe what goes on. Organic can mean different things to different people. There are 50 to 60 organic bodies certifying around the world. Well, if it was so easy to come to a definition, why isn't there one? That's crazy. Like, at least there's only 2 biodynamic bodies because it's highly specific what biodynamics is. But organics is ridiculously like vague. And I think natural is by definition will be even vaguer, even though I've seen the criteria which they've opposed to put in this charter.
Okay, so moving on that from if you can, please touch on the new French regulation. Do you think the natural wines certification is justified? I think we've discussed it already, if there was a need for that, of this category for the certification. And then there were a lot of questions about that actually. So I'm just going to go through a little bit. Do you think that will go, extend into other countries? Is it a good thing? What's your view on that? This video came in to this year, 2020, April, I think was about that time. Can I have your opinion on that, please?
So it's a pilot scheme I think it's going to last till 2023 roughly, maybe more. And it's a few growers who come together to sort of like to put down some sort of basic rules behind what can be called vin nature, so whatever. And it's like no, organic and no sulfites, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, but I sort of resist. I resist this. It's so that the wine. I know why they're doing it. They're doing it to try to protect the word natural, but I don't think it needs protection from anybody. They're doing it so that newcomers who are not working naturally don't call their wines natural or don't market their wines as natural. But I think that shows a real lack of confidence in what they are doing themselves. Really, it doesn't matter whether, if you make wine in the appellation and the appellation says, that wine's not typical, we're going to take away the appellation. And they say, oh no, but it's the essence of the appellation. Well, no, you're known for what you do as a farmer and as a winemaker. You don't need the approval of anyone else. Your sales are not going to drop because you're seen as uncompromising and a purist in what you do. So some of the growers who belong to this new thing, they are uncompromising and they have been victimized by bodies, official bodies in the past. But why then create a sort of like certification so that they can be recognized? Well, that's the way of the world, unfortunately. Will it spread to other countries? Italy already has AAA and has had AAA for way long. So, and AAA is that plus plus anyway. So, other countries there will be growers, but again, it's going to be like it'll start off with 20 or 30 growers, and then more and more will join, and then they'll split. You know, it always happens. It happened with wine fairs like Vini Veri and Manaccio. They split. You know, and it becomes like this Jonathan Swift sort of satire of like, you know, people are arguing about like maybe 5 milligrams of sulfur in the end. That's so against the spirit of natural wine. These people don't want to be judged, and yet they want to be put into a compartment. It makes no sense to me. So I would resist it, but I wish them very good luck because I know some of the growers who are participating, and if that means they don't get victimized by bureaucracy, then good luck to them. But I'm not confident because I'm human nature being what it is, and also as soon as you create a club, you exclude people.
Mm-hmm.
When we did the Real Wine Fair, we could have like done it with all the sort of like, you know, 50 milligrams of sulfur and you must do this and you mustn't filter at all. In the end, we'd rather be inclusive and get people who are on a journey to sort of like be part of the big family. We don't see the point in little families at all. You know, this is a worldwide thing. You know, a guy making wine in California is close to a guy making wine in Australia and a guy making wine in France, because the way the approach, the whole philosophy to life and farming and winemaking is similar. They don't have to be, you know, they don't have to be part of one region or whatever. This is where appellation is sort of fallen away. We have a sort of global thing going on, a global movement united by ideas and by practice. Don't really need a little manifesto.
Okay, great. Now, you know, earlier you talked about the demand is growing in those urban centers around the world. What about, you know, from the producer point, is that, you know, also a link to that? Do you have now more producers switching to natural wine, or, you know, just as a side, you know, producing natural wines, or from the start, do we see more producers? Oh, I want to be natural wine only producer, and are they growing a lot? The producer point of view.
Yeah, all of those things actually. There are people who are moving through the gears who, you know, they were probably quasi organic and then they went on organic, you know, journey, then into biodynamics, then hey, why don't I like try to make one natural wine? Oh, like maybe I should put my whole production that way. And that's like you know, the 10 to 15 year journey. You can't do that overnight. There are people who just come in like very young, they come out of maybe wine college, they buy a hectare or two, they want to start naturally. You know, they're not going to take the whole journey because they have a clear idea what they want, and everything in between. So, um, yeah, what I like to see is people making up their own minds that it's better for them and it's better for their wines. Um, what is most interesting, and we notice at the Real Wine Fair, but also we notice with a lot of slightly larger producers that we work with, is they say their moment, their epiphany is that they open a bottle of their own wine to drink, and they don't like it anymore. They don't want to drink their own wine. So then they want to make wines that they like to drink, which tend to be more natural, free and easy. You know, what we call free wines almost. And then with that in mind, then they learn that process. It doesn't come easily to transform your view from a conventional winemaking outlook. Every discipline, you know, is to make the wine right, but to take your foot off the brake is a real sort of like pleasure in the end. It's an act of faith, I guess, is to make wine without additives because you're so worried about ruining it. But that's why it's often a good idea just to experiment on one wine, and if that works, try it again. If that works again, then try it with more wines, and then dial it down until you feel totally comfortable.
Now, again, from the today's category that I've, this question is about the COVID. You know, it's changed our lives dramatically, you know, and for future, we will see this in a couple of years and next decade, whatever. So do you think at the moment, you know, there's a switch because people maybe realize, you know, and had a pause in their lives? Is there a correlation? I mean, in other words, have your you know, to retail customers perhaps rocketed sky your wine sales, or what is there a correlation? Do you think at the moment with the COVID-19, because people start to think, you know, natural, they want to, you know, switch their lifestyles? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's some interesting ideas in there. I mean, I think one of them is that Yeah, people have more time to think about what they want to, the decisions they're going to make. They want to support their local wine merchant. They like the idea of supporting small producers, small farmers. So, relatively speaking, our sales of more interesting wines has boomed. Our sales of slightly blander, and we do have bland conventional wines, has absolutely died away. Now, I don't know what's going to happen when it's all open over and, like, restaurants perhaps reopen. For me, what I take out of this is like, we can't go on living like this on this planet. We can't keep on taking out of the soil, of the land. We're destroying our environment very quickly. We need to make active choices as consumers. We need to support farmers who are working, sort of in an organic way. But I'm not talking about just organically in the farm, but like small scale, putting back into the environment, not just taking out. So always replacing, and that's just part of the whole overall equation. But the more we do that, and also the more that we value wine as something which is not a price point in a supermarket, $4.99, $5.99, to achieve that, you need to mass produce wine, which means you need to sort of basically industrial farming, lots of pesticides and herbicides, destroying the water table. I mean, water is such a precious resource now with the droughts. I mean, there are people still planting in California, in areas which are effectively deserts, just taking water out of deep sort of water reserves. It's shocking, and we've got to stop that. And I think natural wine. Well, I mean, natural wine because I'm talking natural wine because of organic and biodynamic farming. It's always small scale. It's always trying to be as sustainable as possible, so and always trying to think of the earth, as an entity, as a living entity, the environment as something which is really positive, and of course impacts positively on the quality of the wine. So this idea of respect is a huge thing. Like when you talk to, it's the word that is always used when you talk to small producers. Respect for your customers, respect for the environment, respect for the wine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Douglas, very good. We are 5:30, but I'm going to continue asking for another 10 minutes, perhaps. Is that okay with you?
That's fine with me.
The future. I've got 4 questions there, but I want to link or combine the first 2. The first one is about the challenges that is, the facing producers in the future, and I would like to, link that to the natural wine movement. What is that going to be? What is that for future for you?
Well, the challenge of the future is what I was just saying. Is climate change is the obvious challenge. There are wine regions that are becoming marginal. That were like, and if you're like a small producer, particularly, the effort you have to do in making wine when you know that you might lose 70 to 80% of your harvest each year, it's not economically viable. So we'll see prices going up anyway. Because if you look at European vintages alone, pretty well 2 out of 3 years are bad vintages in terms of quantity. Maybe quality is fine, but that's going to push the prices up. But also it's just like, it's so depressing if you're working and you just see like a massive hailstone storm sort of wipe out a whole vineyard. Maybe take 2 years for that vineyard to recover, and then all the extreme weather events are obviously they're becoming more and more frequent. Wildfires and in California and Australia and Chile. It's not just once in a decade. It's every other year now, and that's the overriding challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you. Last couple of questions now. How do you think that the natural wines is going to evolve past the niche market? Are they going to be more common?
Well, I mean, I think there's still a way to go. I mean, when we first started working with them in the sort of, I suppose, let's say early 2000s, there were probably only 30 or 40 to choose from, and now there must be over 1,000 producers. I mean, at all levels, I guess. So that shows that's not just exponential growth. That's really skyrocketing growth. More and more people converting vineyards. More, even like supermarkets see the value in having a natural wine on their shelf, even if it's something whatever. So Is it niche? Yes, probably, in terms of, like, if I had to estimate what is, like, how much wine is, what's the value of the wine market, I think, in the world is around 400 billion. I don't know, someone could look it up anyway. And probably the value of natural wine is probably a billion, maybe more. But you can't really estimate these things. For me, that's a big, still a pretty big market, but it's growing all the time. And also, if you look at the countries where natural wine is made, it used to be just like France and a bit in Italy and whatever. Now there are probably 30 countries where there are producers. Maybe there's only one, but it's a start. Then whether we were talking about the natural wine culture, the wine bars, the restaurants, the sommeliers, the shops, all over the world. And this is within really a 5-year period. We've seen this explosion of interest, backed by social media gone mad. I mean, like, Instagram is natural winogram as far as I can see. I never see anyone posting on anything else, except for sourdough bread. So there's there's that. So I think it's just, what the reason why it's successful. And I always say that the way we've grown as a company is organic. And by that I mean is that we never took outside investment. There are no heroes. Everyone's a hero. Everyone works for each other. But without the artificial stimulus, things will grow at their own pace. There was no trending in natural wines. Natural wines just appeared and continued to be a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And I think that's sustainable growth. And that's why the phenomenon, if you like, will continue to grow. But if you had to say, like, what is the natural wine movement? There isn't. It's just like a fluid thing, like the sea. It's like it washes back and forth. It's always around us, because the farmers are always going to make those wines, and because people are always going to drink those wines. And once people enjoy those wines, they're not going to drink anything else. And once people realize those wines are actually pretty brilliant, some of them, they're really, they're going to continue to drink those wines. And a new generation of people come on board, and that will be the certainty that they grow up with, not the classical certainties that I grew up with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Douglas. I mean, I've been tutoring because of the COVID at home, over the Zoom, like these sessions, to a lot of students from all over the world for D3, which is the big unit of the Diploma. And I am preparing for next week Italian unit. So one of the things, even WCT put Italian recommended tasting natural wine, and they've put natural wine also in their D6, one of the units. This is the assignment. So yes, I mean, it's definitely, even WCT, which is technically, they saw it when I did 2-3 years ago, faulty wines and natural wine. Now it's also in their program.
Yes, 10 years ago, a friend of mine who did the MW wanted to do a dissertation on attitudes to natural wine in the London wine trade. And she wasn't allowed to do it because it was not considered to be a legitimate subject, because there was no definition of natural wine. She said, well, I can do a definition of natural wine, which I'm sure we can all agree on. I said, no, you can't do that. Then scroll on, and like, we sell wine to the WSCT, and we're selling natural wines. I mean, first they had to acknowledge that Georgia existed, for starters, because you can't teach a course about wine and not teach about its origins. And suddenly they were like sticking, zero sulfur ricacatelli in papers, and then people were coming to me with questionnaires from their diploma. Plumpton College suddenly, which is like the bastion of boring winemaking, you could say. So I hope no one's from Plumpton, but they've opened their heart as well, and they allowed someone to do a dissertation on natural wine, and he did a very good one and won first prize. So if all these like traditionalist places, but also, like, who's teaching now on the WSCT courses? Natural winemakers, or people who have made natural wine. So everything has shifted really subtly, without there was no guns were fired. There was not the sound of revolution in the streets, but it happened, and the culture changed. And now WCT has woken up to it. And why not? Because it's what people talk about, it's what people experience, and it's what people drink. It's a bit like when language changes. Like, you say, "Oh, you're not speaking proper English." Proper English is what people speak. It's just a version of that, and it's like it's always changing. Otherwise, language dies. Well, if wine doesn't change, then wine will die as a phenomenon. So natural wine is just the thing that is always changing. It's the mutable part which makes wine so interesting.
Okay, excellent, Douglas. I am going to finish our Q&A session with you now. We are so grateful for your time today, and it was a great session. It was very useful. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.